they would be too interesting.
Okay, let's leave contingency contract for next time, and we're gonna watch Does MMO Need a Story by Josh Strife Hayes. I need a rambly video because I have been kind of quiet for this entire time. So let's watch this one. Yeah, let's watch this one. Does an MMO need a story? 2 weeks ago, Josh Strife Hayes, MMO opinion. It's Josh Strife Hayes is one of those people who also makes me ramble for hours on end, usually. But yeah, I'm actually curious what this Brit has to say about this.
Do MMORPGs need a story? And if they do, how should that story be constructed?
Okay.
When you sit down to play your favorite MMO, what kind of story experience are you hoping for? Are you playing through a barren, narrativeless land focused on making your own story with the players around you? Or are you halfway through a several thousand-hour emotional roller coaster filled with memorable NPCs and epic boss fights written by a specialist story team?
Yeah, or rambly is a good way of putting it.
I think...
Or are you somewhere in the middle?
To answer this question, I think I'm somewhere in the middle when it comes to my MMOs. I am not exactly an MMO player per se, but I do tend to find my own fun. And I do tend to like approach things on my own pace. I'm not gonna rush through the main storyline, but I would like it to have a really good storyline that I'm able to read and absorb and make sure I understand. And I would like to have an opportunity to pass from the start of the narrative to the end of the narrative, which is why I do not appreciate being locked out of certain events or things that have happened. For example, in World of Warcraft, a system is implemented where you can only level up in a certain expansion, and then you move on to the current expansion, and then you play entirety of the current expansion. Do not like that. I would like to be able to pass through the entirety of history of WoW. I would like to pass it from the start to finish. That's what I would like to do. I would like to have a story along the way for entirety of it, because I don't like it when games decide that I don't want this. I want this.
Ultimately, does an MMO need a narrative thread to interest you? Are you happy playing through just a world? Do you want local NPCs with local problems?
I do.
Or a grand-scale existence-threatening crisis?
I kind of do want both, because I feel like the creation of the... I feel like a lot of the NPCs that are local and the side quests that are local, they build a certain world around you that feels alive and feels lived in. If you're just running around and helping some random dude with his, I don't know, pumpkin problem, that kind of indicates that there is a certain thing here and there's a problem and there's it's a part of the world building, and it feels natural. It feels like a natural thing you gotta do. I'm not here for a power play, so I'm always gonna stop by and like help a friend, help a dude, or like help a girl. Like, oh, help me, bandits rob me. It's like,
Do you want to be a prophesized hero or just explore a land
This
that
is
you're
going to
irrelevant
sound
in?
weird, but I really like the early 6th Age RuneScape events.
I don't know what you're speaking about, by the way, here. I have not played RuneScape, but I sort of imagine from the theme of the conversation that it's those are just basically normal daily bullshit you engage with, right?
Until you make yourself relevant. And if an MMO does try and include a story, which structure would work best? Well, after playing a few MMOs, I've identified what I think are 5 major narrative structures found in several major MMOs. So let's break them down and discuss the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, okay, sure.
I'll also put on screen a visual representation of the narrative construction in relation to the rest of the game as a whole to make it easier to understand. And then after, you can let me know which story structure you like playing through the most in the comments below. So welcome, I'm Josh Strife Hayes, and this
Hello, Josh.
is MMO Opinion. Short dives into the mechanics and
Somewhat short, but sure.
constructions of MMOs. Drop a like on the video or sub to the channel for more MMO
go ahead
stuff,
and do that.
ring the bell for all the future notifications. And as usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube who keep the channel alive.
I love how he still keeps the Patreon supporters on one page. They're slowly becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, but he still does it.
More information on how you can support to the end. For now, let's begin. MMORPG is such a broad term that few agree on exactly what the genre even
At one point in RuneScape, they decided to kill the main god and bring back the lesser gods. Obviously, this changed the world a lot, so they couldn't really limit this to a quest line.
Obviously. That's fair.
We've looked at this before in the video, What Even Is This Genre? But one of the few connecting design threads is most of them have you going
So,
on.
they had a series of one-time, big global events, where the players were foot soldiers.
Oh, that's actually kind of neat. That's a good way to include the players and have them be relevant to the story event, and have it be rewarding for you to participate in this kind of scenario.
They left it up to the players what gods were on top in the new pantheon.
That's good. That's awesome. People who were participating, they got rewarded for participation. They got rewarded for being there for this world-shaping event. That's good. I like this. Like, this is just an additional thing, right? But it doesn't really count as the main story. There's its own story ultimately, but this is a big event that shaped the world, and I like that.
On some kind of pre-written adventure, the central story. In this video, I won't be looking at the contents of the stories themselves, but more the construction of how the player experiences the story. Of course. I think there are 5 dominant design choices which exist on a scale from the world is the focus to the story is the focus. So let's break them down from least story focused to most. Beginning with number 1, no story at all. These are games where the world exists, the players exist, and the players exist within the world, and that's pretty much it.
I think recently, considering the general mood and general shift in attitude when it comes to MMOs, MMOs once were the find your own adventure type games. People were grown on find your own adventure type stories, D&Ds and everything. So when they imagined themselves being in a world that is massively multiplayer, and they imagined themselves finding their own adventure. Hand holding was something I feel like that is like not popular at all. It wasn't really good to create a game that had hand holds you into a specific path. So that's why Final Fantasy XI, for example, that was a completely different experience than Final Fantasy XIV. World of Warcraft was a completely different experience than it is now. Any other MMOs included a lot of finding your own paths, building your own communities. People engaged in the world out there purely because they wanted to engage with the world. So developers usually didn't bog down.
The single-player RPG with other players on screen problem.
It's not exactly a problem as much as it's just a completely different mentality of things. When MMOs were just introduced, it was such a new thing, such a unique thing, that people really just wanted to interact with each other more than anything. They wanted to just like approach a player and be like, "Oh, you're a player. You're a player. Oh, you're a player. Oh, cool." It was like this kind of mentality going on there. And that is why people often created guilds, often did raids, often found recorded videos, like small videos.
Star Wars: The Old Republic just embraced it and made later expansions single player.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, I feel like the recent MMO developers, they are working for a different crowd, a crowd that is used to multiplayer games. They are used to multiplayer games. Multiplayer games like these days is not a rarity, it's a dominant. Multiplayer games in 2000s was a rarity. It was much rarer than it is now. PlayStation just only started implementing multiplayer stuff. Things just started getting... things were just starting to build up.
Days when MMOs were just online hangout places.
Yeah. Now you need to create an overarching storyline, a plot, something to keep your attention, because otherwise there are more focused, much more interesting story-focused RPG games out there for single player, and there are much more interesting online games that keep more attention and are more rewarding in shooters, in MOBAs, and anything else. There are more interesting online games out there than MMOs, right? So people need to create a certain balance. It doesn't hook you anymore. It doesn't provide you...
That is a fair point.
just hanging out with the players. You can hang out with other people in a social media, in VR chat, in anywhere else, and it's much more suited for hanging out than it is not. In MMOs are much less suited for hanging out these days. Separated servers, different regions, all that bullshit. There are also party finders, raid finders, there are guild finders, there's everything. You can just click on a few buttons and now you found a whole group. Sure, you have to wait like a few minutes usually, but it's like, it's fair. You can just AFK and do something else while you do this.
That's a good way of putting it. Modern MMOs need to compete with VR chat.
Yeah, exactly. Modern MMOs need to compete with VR chat. Modern MMO needs to compete with other social platform.
Hand pink waving.
Hey, Bucket. But yeah, it's just like,
there's no game made now.
I feel like this type of plot will not work at all. Just when there's a world and where there's nothing else, it will not work for anyone outside of a certain minority. Outside of a certain minority that enjoys PvP focused experiences, enjoys the hardcore quote unquote experience, because they enjoy griefing others most likely. And it's just like these MMOs will largely fail because to become a massive, it means they have to be not niche, because niche is not massive. So a lot of MMOs are shifting or created with the theme park mindset, because that keeps players together. They can bond over the great storyline, like happened in Final Fantasy XIV. People bonded over the great storyline. I have interacted with several people on my way through the storyline who are like, we joked around, we like interacted with the raid chat, we like basically had a banter going. I have never had that anywhere in any MMO before, because there's no incentive to interact with the with other MMO people in usual groups. But in this case, they actually talked to me, and they talk to each other because they're all bonded through a singular adventure that happens from start to end. And people who play the game, they go in there and want to play the game. The game is designed for you to play whenever you want to play. And that's why people retain their passion for it, I feel like. Plus all the RP experiences you have in there. All the guilds, all the events that you have in RP. Definitely.
Narrative, no quests, no reason to do anything within the world beyond the personal desire to actually do it. Players here are extremely intrinsically motivated. They want to live in this world, and so they will. If we had to visualize these game worlds and story relations,
I hear really good stuff about FF14. I'm surprised other games don't imitate it.
It's hard to imitate it because Final Fantasy XIV had over 11 years of build-up to where it is right now. Just to explain it, over 11 years, yeah. Final Fantasy XIV first came out in 2011, I think, and then it bombed hard because it was bad, really bad. And then it basically stuck with its fan. Actually, Frederick, you know what? Specifically for you. Yeah, specifically for you.
I love MMOs, but nowadays I usually play solo, so I don't get that play with others experience.
I do only like well, it depends. Let me specifically for you, making.
Thinking face.
We're gonna watch this. Next time we're gonna do this. We're gonna watch this. We're gonna watch this next time. I feel like this is such a lesson in game development.
I remember the game was very different when it first came out.
It's such a lesson in the game development. We will talk about this later when we will watch this one, because this is a whole saga.
looked like this: a big world with no story inherently within, but the potential for it to be added anywhere. This design is commonly found in sandbox games like Local Online or EVE Online. The focus is always on the ways that players can interact with the world and other players, usually building things, destroying.
There's usually a player-driven economy, there's usually trading, there's usually farming, there's usually they implement all the systems that are made specifically for player interaction. I think sandbox MMOs, purely sandbox MMOs, are still the only games where you are incentivized to interact with each other more often than not. So it's usually so these games are usually very niche, super niche.
Destroying things and struggling to survive. But the lack of a game-created narrative doesn't mean there's no narrative at all. It just means that any narrative that does exist is purely player-made. These are games where the players will tell you to make your own fun, and that usually means talking to other players, forming alliances, and then killing others. The story of these games is created entirely through the interaction of the community. The pros of this system are complete and genuine open-ended possibility. No one knows what will happen tomorrow because the story is unwritten. Betrayals, team-ups, last-minute daring rescues, they're all genuine. And this gives games a real edge of depth. When a player does something important in these games, the player themselves becomes an important part of the community and the history of the game. Forums will talk about them. Guilds will either love or hate them. An MMO with no inherent story has more potential to throw an unexpected twist at players because you can never predict what another player might do.
Yeah, it's a symbiosis between gaming systems and the sheer unbridled wackiness of human mind.
And it's fun to know that as you are there, it is happening for real. If you're a main player in one of these games, meaning you either lead a guild or are in a big powerful clan, or you were there when the game began so the community know you, you truly feel the world is yours to shape. Now with enough players, these are the game worlds which give truly unique experiences, often making the news for the crazy things players do within them. But the downside is, these games can be more fun to read about than play, because most people are really bad at pacing stories.
Yes, that is the thing. Most people are not professional narrative writers. Most people just want to have an enjoyable time interacting with the story. And when they are thrown into a world, like myself, I'm one of those people. When I'm thrown into a world that doesn't really require me to go somewhere and do something, right? Just do whatever, right? I get lost because I'm very easily distractible. I'm very easily sidetracked, as is, and it's very hard for me to enjoy things on my own. And I just end up being completely...
Well, gentlemen, it's 5 a.m. and I'm dizzy now. Goodbye, everyone.
Good night, Bami. Thank you for joining me. Sorry that it been so late, as usual.
Bon.
Good night. But yeah, it's like, I myself am not exactly a target audience for Sandbox, because I like reading fun stories about Sandbox MMOs and fun epic adventures, but those don't happen to me.
See you, Bon me.
I am a very awkward individual. I'm a very awkward individual.
This is the classic. What do you do after you beat the Ender Dragon problem?
Yeah, exactly. That's why when I want to play Minecraft, I want someone to play with. I want to have some planning sessions. I want to build. I want to have like some direct structure, because without the structure, I lose focus. Without focus, I lose interest. That is basically how my brain functions. That's why I feel more comfortable with games like Final Fantasy XIV, which has a starting point and end point where you want to go, instead of and doing stuff outside of that as I see fit, right? And I enjoy the game story, and I still stop and I do other things, and I'm back to enjoying the game story. Instead of, if you drop me into the world that has nothing in terms of story, I would enjoy that less, because I would not know what to do. In a weird way.
And player-created experiences are often ephemeral, meaning if you're not there to experience the moment they happen, you miss it forever. Spending your time building a castle and then defending it from siege sounds great, but if you build it, log off, and then log back into the castle already destroyed, That's not as great, for you anyway. The danger of live storytelling is missing it means you've missed it forever, and if the player-created narrative is being pushed forward by a few powerful guild leaders, the main players if you will, unless you are one of them, you aren't actually a main part of the story. You're effectively a background character for everyone else.
Yeah.
These games also suffer the most if the player count falls, because without players your world has nothing going on within it, so they'll often fall into death spirals. Players leave, so the story slows down, so players leave. Repeats until the story stops. And then when someone new joins, because there's no player-made story happening and it's hard to make your own fun without other people to have fun with, they leave. The second design is optional paced stories to engage with, but not the focus of the world. Let's take the open world nature of the sandbox, but then sprinkle in optional stories throughout. Not the focus of the gaming experience, but they are there. Some players will log in and just explore the world, doing combat, gathering, crafting, never worrying about any level of narrative. And the world is fleshed out enough that that is a totally viable playstyle. But for those wanting to grasp at the thread of story, preset adventures do exist. A visualization would look like this. The world is still open, and it's a game itself. It's still a complete experience, but you've got optional pockets of story to follow within it.
So it's like something to really enjoy yourself, like something to focus on for a while. Yeah, I guess I would enjoy that more. I do like exploring the world and like bumping into the story. I really enjoyed Elden Ring's narrative style as well, which is basically that. You go around killing things and there's like an overarching plot that happens, but also like big, smaller quests that basically travel the world alongside the quest givers.
Close to old school RuneScape or RuneScape 3. The appeal of these games is the world exists outside the story but is still relevant to them. Neither needs the other, but they both enhance each other by both existing.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the stories can exist independently of other stories, you can pace out the experience and keep it relevant to almost any player, no matter where they are in the world. You can have low, mid, and high level quests effectively everywhere, because it's open to explore the world. It's not a linear path from beginning to end, both narratively and mechanically. A new player can enjoy low-level stories and quests for the story and the experience they'll gain, and a high-level player may not need the experience, but they can still enjoy the adventure. This design lets players who value freedom and choice ignore the stories that they don't like and just go and explore, while also providing the focused goal and guidance that story-focused players want. One of the biggest advantages here is the world is still enjoyable without engaging with the narrative.
Yeah, the world is still enjoyable without engaging with the narrative, and despite the fact that there's exists a narrative, you still can express yourself with the player narrative, be it role-playing, be it guild wars, be it whatever else. It definitely is a strong
We'll have a nice mix of sandbox players and narrative players existing in the same world at the same time, essentially following different but parallel paths. The downside of this design is not all of the world will be open to those who ignore the story entirely, as certain areas, enemies, and items can be locked behind story progression or quest lines. And when a new quest comes out, it itself can be the finale of a several quest-long chain. This means story-focused quest players will always have a slight advantage over the more world gameplay-focused players, as they'll have more of the world open to them. Let's move on to the third design, where stories are the focus, but each story runs independently of and concurrently with others, and each has a defined ending. This is a lesser used style, but it essentially means the game world as a whole now exists to contain multiple narrative threads within it, and each thread has a start and a finish. They don't
actually, that is like, I feel like that's an interesting way to approach games. It's a different way to approach these kind of games, but it's a greater narrative. I feel like it's more of a D&D kind of focus, where every like thing exists here in order to not facilitate one plot, like just one plot and nothing else, right? It facilitates several.
Yeah, he's right about that. In old RuneScape, you couldn't even craft runes without doing a quest.
Oh, really? Interesting.
All together, and they can be experienced in any real order.
Interesting.
For story focus, this would be your Dungeons and Dragons Online. For horizontal leveling, you could make
runes are essential for magic.
I see.
For Guild Wars 2.
Guild Wars 2 and Dungeons and Dragons Online, those definitely are examples of storyline. There's many storylines that have start and end, and your character is the only consistent thing that happens through it. And it feels like you are a participant in a big campaign of tabletop, which is a good feeling. I like that feeling myself.
Visualization would look like this. It is still a complete world.
Yeah.
But now each part of the world exists purely as a container for a specific narrative thread. A local story in each place. The main difference between this style and the previous is, in the previous style, a player may venture into the open world without a story connection, simply because the world alone is enough to provide good gameplay. In this version, however, the game is focused on linking any exploration of the world with a narrative hook. You now need a reason to go into the world beyond just I want to. At this level, you're still mostly dealing with local problems and the world is still open, but every part of the world exists to house a story moment. You can still pick and choose which story you want to follow based on what sounds interesting. This is often an extremely solo-friendly experience, which is enhanced with other people, but doesn't need them.
I feel like that's what MMOs should be. Perfectly fine alone and enhanced with others. You should be able to share an adventure with someone, but it does not need to be like absolutely pivotal for you to have an adventure. Is to have someone for an adventure, basically.
Each area being self-contained means you can create.
So you want the thing about this, you cannot force your players to be a party. You cannot force your players to be a party. If anything, that will detract them from actually wanting to play. You need to make sure that there is some way, a form for you to share that adventure. For example, Final Fantasy XIV, if you really want to, you could, and you probably should, share the entire MSQ experience together with someone, because they will have unique elements to them, aka their job classes, their job quests. For example, if you have 3 people, right? You have 3 people. You have a GPS, you have a tank, and you have a healer. All 3 of them will have an experience alongside you with the storyline, but also all 3 of them will have a completely unique and different experience based on A, city they chosen, B, class they chosen, because they have class quests and job quests that happen later, which are completely unique based around which class or job you are, and C, it creates a feeling of being together with someone, but also them being their own unique character, even though you're going through the same exact plot, effectively.
It's a more focused,
and you're all a warrior of light. I feel like if you play in a party of 3, like a classic D&D adventure, and all choose different classes, roles, and party up, it will be a really interesting experience.
Intense experience for each story moment, and not worry about overwhelming the player by linking it to a greater narrative. The focus is always on the current adventure being able to stand alone, and the only real link to another adventure is the player themselves. One of the strongest advantages of this system is how the stories can stand independently and finish, giving them each satisfying conclusions, even though they may be short. This makes the world feel like a collection of short stories instead of one big...
It's like it's more like, I feel like it's more like a West Marches style D&D campaign, where it's like every part of the world is explorable, but every part of the world has its own little conclusive storyline that you can follow and be like, oh, this is cool. I want to go solve this ghost mansion. And there's like another thing. There might be sprinkles of overarching storyline in this entirety, but most likely most of them is just contained, like a TV show.
Epic storyline. The downside of this type of design is by connecting locations to stories, you're pushing away the player who value a sense of the world itself feeling free. And on the opposite side, you're not able to build the epic connected narratives of specific story-focused games. You're effectively losing the extreme open-ended nature of the sandbox and losing the extreme epic nature of a super long narrative to give lots of shorter, finished experiences. It's a very middle-of-the-road approach, which personally I really like, but
West
this is
Marches are a cool area. Although, I do really like a player-run economy.
It's a cool concept, yeah. Though unfortunately, players are often stupid. So unless the player-run economy is somehow controlled to be balanced, it probably won't work.
You're not getting the hardcore fans of either side. The fourth
Don't worry, I got you what you meant.
design is standalone stories focused on moving from story to story in a much more linear way. The visualization here would look like this. And a great example would be older Neverwinter. This design has the world exist as the container for a narrative, and the narrative is split up into more focused stories with a specific beginning and end, but the end of one will naturally flow into the start of another, either by level
I'd like to play one someday.
The West Marches, you mean?
that you'll finish a story
Or
at,
player-driven economy?
Location you'll end up on the map. Or, and this
If West Marches, we'll see.
is the most egregious example, a new expansion releases and makes the previous zones less relevant. To use Neverwinter as an example, when an expansion releases, it brings with it a new map location, new
map
weapons,
location, yeah,
armor,
sure.
loot, enemies and dungeons, possibly even a level cap increase, and every player is encouraged to go there because the lowest and most basic items of that expansion are usually as good, if not better, than the top items in the previous. But narratively, it may not
West
follow
Marches. I've participated in a few player-run economies.
so
Cool.
mechanically, you're going to want to go there, but narratively,
Yeah, I played West Marches before. I did play tabletop games for a long time. I did play for West Marches game before. It was an interesting experience, honestly. It was like a big guild of tabletop role players, basically D&D 5e players that went in and out. It's basically like a simulation of the Adventure Guild, where you kind of party up with random people, and it eventually kind of led into getting new friendships, and sometimes you get like animosity built up, like rivalries and shit. It's a good system if it works, and if you have consistent players that want to party up and want to do this, and consistent DMs that wants to run stories within this world. If the world is good and alive, people are engaged, it can create some very special stories, I think.
is its own story. The pros of this system are every new expansion
Player-run economies are okay, as long as you have an outlet for excess items.
Oh, yeah, sure.
serves as an onboarding point for new players. You don't need to play through years of content or context to get to the good stuff, because each story is good stuff itself. And because
That is good.
each story has a new area and is self-contained, you're never left behind from the
West
top
Marches sounds really tricky, but also really fun.
Yeah, it's both really tricky and really fun. If you manage to pull off West Marches well, it's good. If you do not manage to pull it exactly in the way that would be good, it's gonna fall flat on its face. It's like that very thin line between good and bad.
elite players. It's essentially a soft reset every new section.
Also, I don't really understand the whole left behind thing. Personally, I would be gladly left behind. I haven't even went past the post ARR content on Final Fantasy XIV because I just want to take my own pace and enjoy it, and also technical issues, but mostly because I wanted to kick back and enjoy the narrative in my own pace. I don't really give a shit to be, current content right now, and like I want to be just enjoying the story as it comes. And even if I catch up to the story into like 2 expansions, I don't give a shit. It's fine.
Every new story, making it very appealing to more casual players. And having a focused story moment also centralizes the player base and makes the game feel active. Everyone is experiencing that story moment together, which makes finding groups for new content really easy because everyone's doing the new content. This keeps the newest part of the game very much alive. The cons of this system are the same.
Yeah, the left behind thing is weird. I haven't grounded through all the and most of game's play.
Soft reset which new players
I don't like rushing through games just because it means that, oh, really, you will get to the current part, and the current part is the coolest one. It's where all the people are. Cool, sure, but I kind of want to enjoy my story like that. I kind of want to take it in the entire adventure. You already had that adventure. Let me have it, please. You know?
value can be very demotivating for hardcore elite players. Knowing that your mechanical progression through the previous story section will be irrelevant when the new section begins can make players question, why am I chasing power when I'm just going to be given more power
hardcore lit players tend to be minority and are weirdos. I don't get them.
If I wait. This is the kind of narrative and mechanical construction that values having new player onboarding points far more than having long-term meaningful progression. Games like this often see huge amounts of player churn, but they're always at least active on the latest bit. Stories in this design system are also effectively time-gated to experience at their peak, as they mostly exist to give mechanical gameplay. And returning to play older stories within these games will give you almost no mechanical advantage and not open up more of the world. So very few players will do that.
I don't understand the whole mechanical advantage. Again, I experience stories because I want to experience the stories. Like, what else is that? Why else would you want to play an MMO with lots of storyline? Like, this is the same thing to me as skipping story. Like, okay, cool. I'd rather not do that. Thank you.
Which makes finding groups for older content much harder. In a way, you have a very limited time to experience any story moment as it's meant to be experienced before it falls into irrelevance and the player base just move on. And the fifth and
Will
final...
you guys play Aethergazer today?
Tomorrow. Today's Tuesday, Ruvel. It's on my schedule. It's on my schedule, Ruvel. It's on the community tab in the schedule. It's Wednesday, not Tuesday. Unless I'm dumb. No, it's Tuesday. Tuesday is Wednesday is Aethergazer. Every Wednesday is Aethergazer. Almost every Wednesday is Aethergazer.
Overall design style is
we'll continue tomorrow.
Story which everything is
Well,
pushing
that's
toward.
not entirely fair. Some players see optimization as an area of challenge. I don't get why people skip story. It's one of the core stuff about Dirks.
True, I guess I can. I mean, I can see the why optimization and like gameplay mechanics tend to be the focus of a lot of people who are very competitive. I am a very story-focused player. I don't really understand skipping story. I don't really understand seeking advantage in experiencing the story. Do you want to experience the story or not? Like, that's the question I have when I play a game. If I don't want to experience the story, I don't play the game. Like, I find it. I am like very.
Also, people just like to see number go up.
I suppose so. I'm not one of those people, by the way. I don't really care. Like, this is actually a very unique thing about me. I don't give a shit about big numbers. Like, the only big numbers I really care about recently is my subscriber count. That's the only way I really found myself appreciative of the bigger player count, of the bigger number, is like when subscriber count counts up. I appreciate that very much, but not otherwise.
Any updates or expansions will add on.
I just don't understand when people don't enjoy story and don't focus on story and don't like go through the story, because story often contextualizes everything that happens in the mechanics. To me, at least.
To or continue this story, but are not themselves onboarding points for new players. The world may have gameplay elements within it, but the focus is always on the main narrative, and you need to start at the start. This would be your Final Fantasy XIV up to Endwalker, and the core plot of most of the Elder Scrolls Online. A visualization might look something like this. Similar to the previous in its linear nature, the difference being...
My favorite. This is my favorite. I like the big epic narrative, the big campaign, the big long form plot line that develops with characters that are popping in and out, with enemies that pop in and out, with recurring factions, with recurring problems, with the things that require long-term solutions. I like this.
Where the previous one had stories self-contained and then moved on from, this one has one story constantly added to. This level of story focus places the inbuilt narrative front and center. The majority of the design decisions are now about getting the player to experience the story. Now, it's important to remember that there may be side distractions or small...
Obviously. There are a lot of distractions in Final Fantasy XIV. Guilds, crafting, side quests, they don't really connect to the main story a lot. Even your class quests don't exactly connect to the main plot in any capacity. They do feature the same characters from the world, from the main plot, but they don't feature the main plot.
Parts of the world within these games that a player can still enjoy without engaging with the narrative, like the Golden Saucer in Final Fantasy XIV, or just running around discovering crafting benches in the Elder Scrolls Online. But when a new player does want to get into the narrative, and the game will always push you to do that, they must begin at page 1 and journey all the way through. The advantage of this system is it allows the greatest scope for an absolutely epic tale to be told, with lots of locations, lots of NPCs, multi-year long narrative arcs, emotional peaks and troughs. Players can form long-term connections with NPCs and feel genuinely affected if they succeed or fail at their missions. For the players willing to invest in a long-term story, this design has the most potential payoff because it can provide the most setup and potentially the most satisfying endings. Players can also feel safe investing time in...
I have to get going, but I like this discussion.
It's all good, Frederick. I'm gonna be stopping in a moment anyway. It's like, what? There's like 5 minutes left.
I think I will catch up with
there's like
later.
5 minutes left of the video left anyway, so I'm not gonna be like overstayed my welcome here.
Into the story because they know it won't suddenly become
+1.
narratively or mechanically irrelevant when the next expansion pops up. So you end up with a very invested, very large player base all experiencing one story together.
Yeah, that's the thing. That creates the biggest connection between people, the storyline. That's why a lot of new people playing Final Fantasy XIV often attract a lot of attention from the fan base because they all want to see this new person experience the story. I don't think people noticed me much when I played it, but then again, I wasn't really that big when I played the game, and I wasn't really consistent in playing it anyway. So that's fair. But I did notice a lot of new people pop up and be like, "Oh, this is new. This is cool. You played MSQ. Nice. Yeah, cool. Yeah."
The downside, however, is new players can see this as extremely intimidating to get into. The well-known attitude of you have to play hundreds of hours of Final Fantasy XIV before it gets good puts a lot of players off, with many opting to buy level boosts and story skips, missing the years of context which make the later story so good. Another ironic downside of this is, despite the fact this design does have the potential to give the most satisfying ending, it also has the most risk if it does end. Writing a satisfying story from humble beginnings to epic conclusion is effort and time for both the writing crew and the players who need to get invested into it. It is a huge time sink to actually care about a landmass or a narrative or a collection of NPCs over a long period of time. And when that story finally concludes and ends, although it's satisfying, it is effort to get them invested into another story. You could just choose to never actually end that story and just add in more and more bad guys and more stakes, but if you do that, you run the risk of never ending the story and running into constant power creep, which becomes draining. This is what happened to World of Warcraft, because resetting the game to effectively zero and starting from humble beginnings again doesn't feel good for the long-term players.
Sure.
This is why Cataclysm was such a risk. Changing around the long-term story that people knew and expecting them to get invested into the start of something new was difficult. So while yes, long-term stories do have the greatest potential payoff, they also ironically have the greatest danger if you ever do reach that payoff. Games with lots of small stories can finish the story because the story itself is enjoyable and...
I feel like Final Fantasy XIV managed to achieve that with their storyline, from what I've seen so far anyway. The Endwalker is the big finale, the big finale, like it's just like really pushing it in the finale. And then the next one, which seems to be just an exploration focused chapter, is just like a relaxing. It's like beach, it's like dragons, it's like all the new world kind of thing. It's like you travel in, it's all cheerful, it's all completely different tone. I've seen the trailer, it's completely different tone to Endwalker from what I've seen. So it's like a reprieve, almost like a reprieve from the big bittersweet finale. Is the start of the new age, so to speak. I feel like they will have the time to build up a new baddies, the time to build up new adventures, new things to explore in the horizon, new grand adventure that awaits, and all grand adventures start from humble beginnings.
Not too draining to get into, enjoy, and then move on from. If a story is multiple years long, ending it means you are going to lose players who are invested in it. This design means a player always has a...
That's fair. I think Yoshi P knows exactly that, and he says you play when you want to play.
Narrative to follow for both their level and in-game location, and will essentially always have the same adventure as everyone else in the same order. There's very few to no unique player-made adventures to be had in these narrative-focused games.
Disagree. You have a lot of the guild stuff possible. You have a lot of RP stuff possible. The fact that you don't really affect the world, that's fair. But then again, you don't really affect the world in any other MMO, except maybe in Sandbox. Even then, the world needs to reset to a certain level. You can't destroy the world. Like, that's not a possibility. So, whatever.
So, 5 overarching narrative construction blueprints. No story at all, just an open world to play in and create a narrative if you want with other players. A world to play in with small narrative moments contained within it that are not the focus. A world centered around stories, with each running independently and simultaneously. A world focused on stories running in a linear one after the other design, with each being an onboarding point for that story and leaving the previous behind. And a massive overarching story told over many years and many updates. Now, some MMOs will contain multiple examples of the above 5 styles. RuneScape is an open world game, but it does also have long-running epic storylines. Final Fantasy XIV does have an epic storyline, but also the self-contained class and job quest line.
Yeah.
Many MMOs will try and mix in different narratives.
It's best to mix it in. It's cool.
Structures for different parts of their game, but most will have a rather obvious overall approach relating to one of the above 5. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the first or 5th style. Having no story to me feels a bit too open, and having a single focus story feels a bit too restricting. I like MMO games which sit within the middle 2, 3, and 4. Choices. Worlds which can stand on their own merits that I can explore without being narratively engaged, and narratives that I can engage with to enhance the world that I'm in. I think this is why games like old school RuneScape, Guild Wars 2, and The Elder Scrolls Online appeal to so many middle-of-the-road MMO players. There's enough variety within them when it comes to narrative structure that most players can find a playstyle they like and just do that. You're not appealing to the hardcore of either side. But what do you think? And which narrative structure do you enjoy playing through the most? Are you
personally,
a story open world sandbox person, or a purely narrative story follower?
Personally, I would say my most enjoyable time would be potentially in the story focused capacity, because I don't know, I'm a person who likes to follow storylines. I'm a person who likes to follow to have a reason to exist in this world. I don't want to be like, for example, I don't want to be maybe Warrior of Light, like super unique person, but I want to be someone who follows the storyline, defeats the bad guy, and then stops for a while, enjoys the time, fishes, does whatever else, like enjoys the world. But I do want to have a storyline to facilitate me to stand off my ass and then go do something else, continue the adventure, continue the enjoyment. One of my current dreams right now is to have that RP experience of a party of Warriors of Light someday with like 2 other people, and then maybe even like a RP focus a little bit on that, and just like have this as a series maybe of gameplay. We'll see if I ever find if I ever find people to do that with me, because that seems like a year plus narrative focus project, which is don't think a lot of people would commit.
In the comments below. Cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and our Discord. And as always, have a great day.
Thank you, Josh. Have a great day too.